The bitter wind howled across the Montana prairie, carrying with it the sting of early winter as Owen Taylor urged his exhausted horse forward through the mounting snowstorm. November of 1885 had turned cruel without warning, and what had begun as a simple journey back to his ranch was quickly becoming a battle for survival. His weathered face burned from the cold, his gloved hands stiff around the reins as he squinted against the blinding white. He would have missed her entirely had his horse not balked suddenly, ears pricking forward toward a dark shape huddled against a cluster of boulders. At first, Owen thought it might be a wounded animal or a trick of the gathering dusk. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human, a woman, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, shaking violently in the merciless wind. "Madam," he called out, dismounting carefully, boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Madam, are you hurt?" She looked up, her face pale as the snow itself, lips tinged an alarming blue. Her threadbare coat offered almost no protection against the elements, and her simple dress was already crusted with ice along the hem. She couldn't have been much older than 25, but fear and cold had etched lines of exhaustion across her delicate features. The stage," she managed through chattering teeth. "Attacked, I ran, got lost." Owen didn't need to hear more. The stagecoach route was miles away, and the fact she'd made it this far on foot in this weather was nothing short of miraculous. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Name's Owen Taylor." "Got a ranch about 3 miles east of here," he said, his voice gentle but urgent as he helped her to her feet. "You'll be warm before the hour's through, I promise you that." Her eyes, a startling shade of amber, met his briefly. "Abigail," she whispered. "Abigail Jensen." The wind shrieked around them as Owen lifted her onto his horse with practiced ease. She was light, too light in his arms, and he could feel her entire body shuddering against him as he swung up behind her. "Hold tight now, Miss Jensen," he murmured close to her ear as he gathered the reins, his arm securely around her waist. "Storm's getting worse. We need to ride hard." As they set off into the white wilderness, neither could have known that this desperate encounter would forever change the course of their lives, binding their fates together in ways that the harsh Montana territory had never witnessed before. The journey to Owen's ranch was a blur of whipping snow and biting cold. Abigail drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady heartbeat at her back and the strong arm that kept her from falling. Owen navigated by instinct more than sight, trusting his horse and the knowledge of his land born from 6 years of working this unforgiving country. "Stay with me, Miss Jensen," he urged whenever he felt her slump against him. "Just a little further now." Relief flooded through him when the silhouette of his ranch house finally emerged from the white haze. It wasn't grand, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a small stable attached, but it represented safety and warmth, 2 things Abigail desperately needed. His ranch hand, Miguel Vasquez, rushed out at the sound of their approach, his weathered face creasing with concern as he helped Owen dismount with Abigail. "Dios mío, who is she?" Miguel asked, already moving to take the horse to the stable. "Stagecoach attack survivor," Owen replied tersely. "Get a fire going in the main room, hottest you can make it." Inside the cabin, Owen gently laid Abigail on his bed, quickly assessing her condition. Her breathing was shallow, her skin icy to the touch. Frostbite was a real concern. He worked methodically, removing her snow-soaked shoes and replacing them with thick wool socks from his own drawer. "Miss Jensen." "Abigail, I need to get these wet clothes off you," he explained, his voice professional despite the intimacy of the situation. "I've got blankets and a nightshirt you can wear. It's big, but it's dry." Her eyes flickered open briefly, understanding dawning despite her semi-conscious state. She managed a weak nod. With as much decorum as the emergency allowed, Owen helped her into the dry clothing, averting his eyes when propriety demanded, then wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Miguel returned with coffee and a pot of stew that had been simmering all day. "The storm's worsening," he reported grimly. "We'll be snowed in by morning." Owen nodded, his attention focused on Abigail as he coaxed her to sip from a cup of hot broth. The stage line will think she perished in the attack. No one will come looking until the weather clears. What happened to the others? Miguel asked quietly. Owen's expression darkened. She hasn't said, but I can guess. Road agents, most likely. The Montana Territory had grown safer in recent years, but outlaws still preyed on the stagecoach routes, especially as winter approached and desperation set in. As night fully descended, and the cabin creaked under the assault of the storm, Owen settled into a chair beside the bed, prepared to watch over Abigail through the night. Miguel had retired to the small bunkhouse where he and the two other hands currently in town for supplies normally slept. Around midnight, Abigail stirred, her eyes opening with greater clarity than before. She startled at the unfamiliar surroundings, attempting to sit up. "Easy now," Owen said, leaning forward. "You're safe. You're at my ranch." "The stagecoach," she said, memory flooding back. "They shot the driver. Everyone was shouting." Her voice trembled. "A man grabbed me. I fought him off and ran. I just ran and ran." "You did right," Owen assured her. "Rest now. We can talk more tomorrow." But Abigail seemed unable to stop now that the words had started. "I was going to Virginia City. My aunt lives there. I was supposed to." Her voice broke. "My luggage, my money, everything is gone." Owen gently pressed another cup of warm broth into her hands. "First things first, we need to get you well. The rest will sort itself out." She took the cup gratefully, studying him over its rim. Despite his rough exterior, the beard, the calloused hands, the weathered skin that spoke of long days under the Montana sun, there was a gentleness to Owen Taylor that calmed her racing heart. "Why would you help a stranger like this?" she asked softly. Owen's expression remained impassive, but his blue eyes softened slightly. "Out here, we don't leave folks to die in the snow. Simple as that." It wasn't the whole truth, of course. Owen had seen enough death in his 32 years, first during the war, then in the lawless early days of the territory, to last several lifetimes. The thought of leaving anyone, let alone a woman alone and unprotected, to the mercy of a Montana blizzard was unthinkable. "Thank you," Abigail whispered, her amber eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary before she drifted back to sleep. Owen remained in his chair, listening to the howl of the wind and watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. It had been a long time since he'd had a woman in his house. Not since Marie had left 3 years ago, unable to bear the isolation of ranch life after they lost the baby. He pushed the memory away. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it, decisions about what to do with Miss Abigail Jensen once the storm cleared. The blizzard raged for 3 days, imprisoning them in the ranch house with drifts that reached past the windows. During that time, Abigail's strength gradually returned, and Owen learned more about the mysterious woman fate had delivered to his doorstep. She was 24, the daughter of a St. Louis merchant who had died 6 months earlier, leaving her with little more than outstanding debts and a letter from her mother's sister in Virginia City, offering a home and possibly work as a schoolteacher. "I've never been west of the Mississippi before this journey," she admitted on the second evening as they sat by the fire, she wrapped in a quilt while Owen mended a bridle. "I had no idea it could be so unforgiving," Owen supplied when she hesitated. "Beautiful," she corrected, surprising him. "Even in its harshness, when the stage was crossing the plains before the storm, I'd never seen such space, such sky." She gestured toward the window where snow continued to fall. "Even this has its own terrible beauty." Owen studied her thoughtfully. Most Easterners he'd encountered viewed Montana as little more than a savage wilderness to be endured. Her perspective intrigued him. "It gets under your skin," he acknowledged, "makes other places feel too confined." "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Came out in '79, after trying my hand at a few other things back east. Worked as a hand on the Carson spread for 2 years, then started building this place." Pride crept into his voice despite his attempt at nonchalance. "It's not much yet, but I've got 80 head of cattle, good water rights, and the start of a decent breeding program." "You've built something from nothing," Abigail observed. "That's remarkable." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what needs doing." Miguel entered from the kitchen, bringing fresh coffee. Over the days, Abigail had come to appreciate the older Mexican's quiet efficiency and unexpected humor. He'd been with Owen from the beginning, having followed him from the Carson ranch. "The snow is slowing," Miguel reported. "Perhaps tomorrow we can dig out to the stable proper. The animals need checking," Owen nodded. "The hands should try to make it back tomorrow if the trails are passable." "And I should think about continuing to Virginia City," Abigail added softly, though the thought filled her with unexpected dread. This small cabin, despite the circumstances, had become a haven. "Not just yet," Owen said, more quickly than he intended. "The roads will be dangerous for days after a storm like this. Besides, you're still recovering." The look of relief that crossed her face shouldn't have pleased him as much as it did. On the morning of the fourth day, the storm finally broke. The sun emerged in a sky so brilliantly blue it hurt to look at it, its light transformed into diamonds by the snow-covered landscape. Owen and Miguel spent hours digging paths to the stable and bunkhouse, while Abigail insisted on making herself useful by preparing a proper meal. By midday, the two other ranch hands brothers named Everett and Daniel Hollister had made it back from town, bringing news of the stagecoach attack. 5 dead, Everett reported grimly as they sat around the kitchen table. Driver, shotgun guard, and 3 passengers. "They're saying it was the Blackwell gang, moving north after the robbery in Bozeman last month." "Did they?" Abigail couldn't finish the question. "They found tracks leading away from the coach," Daniel said, his young face solemn. "A woman's boots, they think, then nothing. The assumption in town is that the last passenger either was taken or died in the storm." Owen saw Abigail's hands trembling slightly and reached across the table, briefly covering them with his own. "You're presumed dead," he said bluntly, but not unkindly. "Which might be an advantage if these outlaws are still in the area." She nodded, understanding the implication. "My aunt will think I'm dead. Once the roads clear properly, we can get word to her," Owen assured her. "But for now, it might be safer if news of your survival stays within these walls." That evening, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Owen found Abigail standing on the small covered porch, staring out at the moonlit snow. She'd borrowed clothing from him, trousers rolled up at the ankles, a flannel shirt that swallowed her slender frame but had somehow managed to look both vulnerable and determined. "I don't want to be a burden," she said without turning as he joined her. "I can work. I know how to keep books. My father taught me." Owen leaned against the railing beside her. "Ranch books are a mess, always mean to sort them come winter, but there's always something more pressing." "Then let me help," she said, finally looking at him, "as payment for your kindness." The moonlight silvered her dark blonde hair and illuminated the fine bones of her face. Something tightened in Owen's chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried after Marie. "If you're set on it, I won't argue," he replied, striving for a casual tone. "But there's no debt between us, Miss Jensen." "Abigail," she corrected softly. "After sharing your home for days, I think we're beyond formalities, Mr. Taylor." "Owen," he conceded with a slight smile. A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out at the snow-covered ranch. In the distance, a wolf howled, the sound echoing across the valley. "Sometimes I forget how beautiful it is here," Owen said quietly. "Get caught up in the work, the worry." "What do you worry about?" Abigail asked. He considered the question. "Whether cattle prices. Whether I'm building something that will last or just fooling myself that a man can tame this country." "I don't think it's about taming it," she observed thoughtfully. "It's about finding a way to live alongside it, respecting its power." Owen glanced at her, surprised again by her insight. "That's an uncommon perspective for someone who nearly died in its power a few days ago." "Perhaps nearly dying clarifies one's thinking," she replied with unexpected humor. Owen found himself chuckling, the sound strange to his own ears. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. As the wolf called again, Abigail shivered slightly, and Owen instinctively stepped closer. "Let's get you inside before you catch your death after all. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning your keep." Over the next 2 weeks, as December settled firmly upon the Montana territory, Abigail Jensen became an unexpected fixture at the Taylor Ranch. True to her word, she brought order to Owen's chaotic financial records, revealing both problems and opportunities he hadn't recognized. "You're losing money on feed because you're buying it piecemeal," she explained one evening, papers spread across the kitchen table. "If you contracted for the entire winter's supply in advance, you'd save nearly 15%. Owen studied the neat columns of figures she'd prepared. "Never thought of it that way. And your calving records are incomplete. You can't make proper breeding decisions without knowing which bloodlines perform best in your conditions." He raised an eyebrow. "You seem to know a fair bit about ranching for a city merchant's daughter." A hint of color touched her cheeks. "I've been reading. Found some agricultural journals in that trunk in the corner. Hope you don't mind." "Mind, I'm impressed," he admitted, and he was. Not just by her quick grasp of ranching principles, but by her willingness to adapt to their rustic circumstances without complaint. She'd taken over much of the cooking, learning from Miguel's patient instruction, and had even begun mending clothes and linens that had long needed attention. The small cabin felt different with her presence, warmer somehow, and not just from the fire. The hands had accepted her without question, treating her with a respectful deference that amused Owen. Everett and Daniel, in particular, seemed to stand straighter and mind their language whenever Abigail was present. "You've civilized the place," Miguel observed to Owen one afternoon as they repaired fence line damaged by the storm. "It's good." Owen grunted noncommittally, unwilling to examine too closely the changes Abigail had brought or his growing feelings for her. The fact remained that she was bound for Virginia City as soon as travel became safe. Her life was elsewhere. Yet each evening, as they sat by the fire talking long after Miguel and the hands had retired, Owen found himself revealing more about his life than he had to anyone in years. He told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, his service in the Union Army despite being barely 17 when he enlisted, his restless years after the war trying to find a place where the memories didn't haunt him. "Montana was the first place that felt right," he explained. "Big enough to breathe, new enough that a man is judged by what he builds, not where he came from." In turn, Abigail shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her mother's death when she was 16, the years helping her father as his business slowly failed. "He wasn't a good businessman," she admitted, "but he was a good father. He made sure I was educated, even when it wasn't fashionable for girls to know more than household management and music." "He'd be proud of how you've handled yourself," Owen said sincerely. She looked down, a familiar sadness crossing her features. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done more to save the business, if I'd noticed the problems sooner." "You can't carry that," Owen said firmly. "Trust me on this. I've spent too many years blaming myself for things beyond my control." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, of understanding that went beyond their brief acquaintance. The spell was broken by a burst of wind that rattled the window panes, reminding them of the world outside their small circle of warmth. "It's getting late," Abigail said, rising from her chair. "And tomorrow I want to start on the breeding records." Owen nodded, watching her retreat to the small curtained-off area they'd arranged for her privacy. Long after she'd gone, he sat staring into the dying fire, confronting the uncomfortable truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Abigail Jensen. And she would be leaving as soon as the mountain passes cleared. Mid-December brought a brief thaw, raising hopes that the roads to Virginia City might soon be passable. Owen found himself both dreading and anticipating this development, torn between wanting Abigail's safety and selfishly wishing for her continued presence on his ranch. The decision was unexpectedly postponed when Everett returned from a supply run to the nearest trading post with disturbing news. "Blackwell gang still in the area," he reported, stamping snow from his boots as he entered the cabin. "Held up a freight wagon 3 days ago. Drivers said there were 5 of them heavily armed." Owen's expression darkened. "Any description?" "Same as before." "Leader's a tall man with a burned scar down the right side of his face. They're asking about a woman survivor from the stagecoach attack." Abigail, who had been setting the table for supper, froze. "They're looking for me. Why?" "Hard to say," Owen replied, though his mind was already racing through possibilities, none of them good. Maybe they don't like leaving witnesses. Maybe there's another reason. I saw their faces, she said quietly. I could identify them. All the more reason you're staying put until we're sure they've moved on, Owen said firmly. That night, unable to sleep, Owen checked and rechecked his Winchester and the Colt revolver he kept by his bed. The thought of the Blackwell gang anywhere near his ranch near Abigail filled him with a cold fury that surprised him with its intensity. He was standing by the window, peering into the darkness, when he sensed rather than heard Abigail's approach. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning. "So should you," she countered softly, coming to stand beside him. The moonlight outlined her slender figure, wrapped in a quilt against the night chill. "I'm used to keeping watch," he replied. "You think they'll come here," she said. It wasn't a question, Owen sighed, seeing no point in lying. "It's possible. The trading post has plenty of gossip. Someone might have mentioned finding a woman's tracks after the storm." "Then I should leave," Abigail said firmly. "I won't bring danger to your home after all you've done." Owen turned to her, unable to keep the intensity from his voice. "And go where? Alone in winter with outlaws hunting you?" "No," he shook his head decisively. "This ranch is defensible. We have 4 armed men. You're safer here than anywhere else until the law can deal with Blackwell." "And if they come before that happens," she pressed. His expression hardened. "Then they'll learn what happens to men who threaten what's mine." The possessive word hung in the air between them, unintended but undeniable. Abigail's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't retreat or object. "Owen," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever she might have said was interrupted by the distant sound of a horse's whinny, not from their own stable, but somewhere out in the darkness. Owen's hand immediately went to his revolver. "Get away from the window," he ordered quietly. "Wake Miguel. Tell him and the hands to arm themselves but stay out of sight. Could be nothing, but I'm not taking chances." As Abigail hurried to obey, Owen extinguished the small lamp that had been burning, plunging the cabin into darkness. He moved to the door, listening intently. For several long minutes, there was nothing but the usual night sounds. Then, faintly, he caught the murmur of men's voices, too distant to make out words but clear enough to confirm they weren't imagining things. Miguel materialized beside him, Winchester in hand. "The brothers are covering the back," he whispered. "How many? Can't tell yet. At least 2, maybe more." Abigail appeared at Owen's other side, and to his surprise, she was holding his spare revolver. Her face was pale but determined in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. "I know how to use this," she said before he could object. "My father insisted I learn after our store was robbed." Owen wanted to order her to hide to stay safe, but the resolute look in her eyes told him it would be futile. Instead, he nodded curtly. "Stay low, behind cover. Don't shoot unless you have no choice." The voices outside grew louder, and Owen could make out the approach of several horses. He tensed, hand tightening on his weapon. "Should be dark," a gruff voice was saying. "Harrison said the Taylor spread was 2 miles east of the creek." "I still say this is a waste of time," another voice replied. "That woman's long dead in the snow. Boss wants to be sure," the first voice insisted. "Said she saw something she shouldn't have. Besides, even if she's not here, a ranch like this might have supplies worth taking." Owen's jaw tightened. Not Blackwell himself then, but definitely his men. He caught Miguel's eye, signaling silently with hand gestures they'd developed over years of working together. Miguel nodded, understanding the plan. The riders, 4 of them, Owen could now see had stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, seemingly debating their approach. The element of surprise was still in the ranch's favor. "Miguel, get to the barn through the back," Owen whispered. "You and Daniel circle behind them. Everett can cover from the bunkhouse window. I'll handle things here." He turned to Abigail. "Stay inside, away from the windows." She hesitated, clearly reluctant to separate, but finally nodded. Owen waited until Miguel had slipped away before moving to position himself by the front window, which offered a clear view of the approaching riders. Taking a deep breath, Owen called out in a voice that carried through the night. "That's far enough. This is private property and we're armed." The riders immediately scattered, diving for cover. A shot rang out, splintering wood near the window where Owen stood. "We just want the woman," one of the men shouted. Hand her over and maybe we don't burn this place to the ground. There's no woman here, Owen replied steadily. Just me and my hands who don't take kindly to night visitors. Another shot, closer this time. Owen ducked as glass shattered inward. Last chance, rancher, the voice called again. We know she's here. Owen's response was to level his Winchester and fire a precise shot that struck the ground inches from where one of the outlaws was taking cover. The man yelped and scrambled back. What followed was a tense exchange of gunfire. Owen was careful with his shots, conserving ammunition while keeping the outlaws pinned down. From the bunkhouse, Everett provided additional covering fire. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for Miguel and Daniel's flanking maneuver. Taking the outlaws by surprise from behind, they managed to wound one and disarm another before the remaining two realized they were caught in a crossfire. Throw down your weapons, Owen commanded, stepping onto the porch with his rifle aimed steadily. It's over. For a moment, it seemed the outlaws would comply. Then the largest of them made a desperate lunge toward his fallen pistol. Owen's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a howl of pain. The last standing outlaw immediately raised his hands. Don't shoot, I'm done. The entire exchange had lasted less than 10 minutes, but to Owen, it had felt like hours. As Miguel and Daniel secured the prisoners, Owen scanned the area for any signs of additional threats. Is it over? Abigail asked from the doorway, the revolver still clutched in her hand. For now, Owen replied grimly. But if these are Blackwell's men, he'll know they're missing soon enough. Dawn found them with 4 bound outlaws in the barn, one nursing a shoulder wound that Abigail had reluctantly treated. None were Blackwell himself, but they confirmed they'd been sent specifically to find the woman from the stagecoach. What did she see? Owen demanded of the apparent leader, a scar-faced man named Tanner. Tanner spat on the ground. Don't know exactly. Boss was real worked up about it, though. Said she grabbed something that belonged to him during the struggle. Abigail, standing slightly behind Owen, frowned. I didn't take anything, she insisted. I was just trying to get away. Well, boss thinks different, Tanner replied with a malicious grin, and he don't give up easy. He'll come looking when we don't return. Owen's expression hardened. Let him come. The immediate problem was what to do with the prisoners. The nearest town with a proper jail was a full day's ride, and with Blackwell potentially on his way, Owen didn't want to deplete the ranch's defenses by sending men to deliver the outlaws. We could wait for the circuit judge, Miguel suggested. He's due through these parts after Christmas. Too long, Owen decided. Everett, at first light, you ride for the marshal in Helena. Tell him we've got 4 of the Blackwell gang and reason to believe Blackwell himself might be headed this way. Everett nodded, though he looked concerned. That's 3 days round trip at best, boss. You'll be short-handed if trouble comes. We'll manage, Owen said with more confidence than he felt. Daniel, help Miguel secure these men in the root cellar. It's the only place sturdy enough to hold them. As the hands carried out his orders, Owen turned to find Abigail watching him intently, her face pale but composed. This is my fault, she said quietly once they were alone. I've brought this danger to your home. Owen shook his head firmly. No, these are bad men doing what bad men do. None of this is on you. But they're here because of me, she insisted. Because of something I supposedly took, though I can't imagine what. Owen considered this. Think carefully. During the attack, did you grab anything, even accidentally? A bag, a box, anything that might have seemed valuable. Abigail closed her eyes, trying to reconstruct those terrifying moments. I was pulled from the coach. One of the men, he had a scar like that Tanner, he grabbed me. There was a struggle, I think. Her eyes flew open. My reticule. I was clutching it the whole time. When I fought him off, I ran with it still in my hand. Where is it now? Owen asked urgently. In my things. I didn't even think about it, it just contains personal items. A handkerchief, a small mirror, my mother's locket. She hesitated. And the letter from my aunt. There was nothing valuable. Let's have a look, Owen suggested. If Blackwell wants it this badly, there must be something. They retrieved the small beaded bag from Abigail's few possessions. It seemed unremarkable, worn from travel, with a simple drawstring closure. The contents were exactly as Abigail had described, with nothing that appeared worth killing for. Maybe it's not what's in it, but the bag itself, Owen mused, turning it over in his hands. Then he paused, noticing something. The lining is loose here. Carefully, he worked a finger under the silk lining, feeling something thin and stiff hidden between the layers. With gentle pressure, he extracted a folded document. "What is that?" Abigail asked, bewildered. "I never put anything there." Owen unfolded the paper, revealing a hand-drawn map with notations in a cramped, hurried script. "Looks like directions to something, landmarks, distances." His eyes widened slightly, and this X marked main shaft with figures beside it. "A mine map," Abigail peered over his shoulder. "Not just any mine," Owen said grimly. "These coordinates are in the Blackfoot territory. There was news last month about a major gold strike being kept quiet while the proper claims were filed. This could be it." "But how did it get in my reticule?" Owen frowned in thought. "Was anyone else handling your baggage before the attack? Someone at a stop, perhaps?" Abigail's expression cleared suddenly. "The driver. He helped me with my bags when we changed coaches in Fort Benton. He seemed nervous, kept looking over his shoulder." She paused. "He was the first one they shot. So he hid this map in your bag, perhaps planning to retrieve it later, but Blackwell killed him before he could, and now thinks you have it deliberately." Owen carefully refolded the document. "This explains a lot. What do we do?" Abigail asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Owen met her gaze directly. "We prepare. Blackwell will come, and we need to be ready when he does." The next 2 days passed in a tense vigil. Owen and his remaining men fortified the ranch as best they could, moving supplies into the main house, establishing clear fields of fire, and keeping constant watch. Abigail insisted on taking her turn at sentry duty, proving herself remarkably steady with both rifle and revolver. "Where did a St. Louis merchant's daughter learn to shoot like that?" Owen asked after watching her place 5 shots in a tight grouping on a practice target. A small smile touched her lips. "My father may have been a poor businessman, but he was an excellent marksman. Said a woman alone needs to protect herself." Her expression turned wistful. "He'd be happy to know his lessons might save my life." Owen found himself increasingly drawn to this woman who faced danger with such quiet courage. In quieter moments between preparations, they talked, learning more about each other's lives and dreams. "What will you do after?" he asked one evening as they sat cleaning weapons. "When this is over and the roads clear to Virginia City," Abigail's hands stilled on the rifle she was oiling. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "A month ago, teaching school in Virginia City seemed like my only option. Now," she didn't finish the thought, but her eyes, when they met his, held a question that made Owen's heart beat faster. "You could stay," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them properly. "The ranch needs good bookkeeping, and He hesitated, then pressed on. "I've grown accustomed to your company." It was an understatement so profound it bordered on dishonesty. The truth was that Owen couldn't imagine the ranch or his life without her now. But fear of rejection held him back from fuller confession. Abigail regarded him thoughtfully. "Is that all it is, being accustomed?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. "No," he admitted quietly. "It's more than that." Whatever she might have replied was interrupted by Miguel's urgent call from outside. "Riders coming, at least 6, moving fast." Owen was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "It's time," he said, all personal matters set aside. "Take position by the back window. Remember the plan." Abigail nodded, her expression resolute as she moved to her assigned place. The plan was simple but sound. Let the attackers believe the ranch was less defended than it actually was, draw them in close, then catch them in a crossfire from the main house and the concealed positions Miguel and Daniel had established. Owen took a breath, steadying himself for what was to come. Through the window, he could see the approaching riders, 7 of them, with a tall, broad-shouldered man in the lead. Even at a distance, the scar on the right side of his face was visible. Blackwell had arrived. The outlaws approached with more caution than their advance scouts had shown, spreading out to surround the small ranch house rather than charging directly. Owen recognized the tactics of a man who'd seen military action. "I know you're in there, rancher," Blackwell's voice boomed across the yard. "And I know you've got my men and the woman. Send them both out and maybe we can avoid unnecessary bloodshed." "Your men tried to raid my property," Owen called back. "They're waiting for the marshal now. As for any woman, there's none here but my wife." The lie was strategic. If Blackwell believed Abigail was Owen's wife, he might be less inclined to believe she was his quarry. From her position, Abigail shot Owen a startled look but quickly composed herself. Blackwell's laugh was harsh. "Nice try, we've been watching this place." "That woman arrived during the storm. Hand over what she stole and we'll be on our way." "She stole nothing," Owen replied steadily, "and she's under my protection now." "Have it your way," Blackwell snarled. "Boys, burn them out." The attack came suddenly, a volley of gunfire followed by flaming arrows aimed at the cabin's roof. Owen had anticipated this and had kept buckets of water ready. Abigail moved quickly, dousing the first flames before they could take hold. As the outlaws pressed closer, believing the defenders occupied with the fire, Miguel and Daniel opened fire from their hidden positions. Two of Blackwell's men fell immediately, while the others scrambled for cover. What followed was a brutal exchange of gunfire that seemed to last forever. Owen moved from window to window, firing deliberately, making each shot count. Abigail stayed low but steady, reloading for him when needed and taking shots of her own when clear targets presented themselves. The tide turned when Blackwell, enraged by the unexpected resistance, made a reckless charge toward the house. Owen's shot caught him in the leg, dropping him in the open yard. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fallen, began to waver. "It's over, Blackwell," Owen shouted. "Order your men to throw down their weapons." Blackwell, bleeding but defiant, raised his pistol toward the house. Before he could fire, a shot rang out from beside Abigail's revolver, striking Blackwell's hand and sending his weapon spinning away. "That's for the stagecoach driver," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The fight went out of the remaining outlaws quickly after that. By sundown, all 5 survivors, including Blackwell, were secured in the barn alongside their earlier companions. Owen, checking Abigail for injuries as Miguel and Daniel guarded the prisoners, found himself overwhelmed by relief and another, stronger emotion he could no longer deny. "You could have been killed," he said roughly, his hands gentle as they traced her face, her shoulders, assuring himself she was whole. "So could you," she replied softly. "But we weren't. We survived, Owen." "Yes," he agreed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We did." And then, with the fading light of battle still around them, Owen Taylor did something he had promised himself he wouldn't do until this danger was past. He kissed Abigail Jensen, pouring into the embrace all the fear, relief, and love that had built within him over the past weeks. To his wonder and joy, she kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as if she'd found her rightful place at last. The return of Everett with the marshal and a posse the following day brought an official end to the threat. Marshal James Thornton, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, listened to their account with growing interest, especially regarding the hidden map. "That claim's legitimate," he confirmed after examining the document. "Filed properly last month by the Richardson Mining Company." The stagecoach driver must have been planning to jump the claim. "And Blackwell?" Owen asked. "Wanted in 3 territories," Thornton replied with satisfaction. "There's reward money coming to you folks. Quite substantial, actually." After the prisoners were taken away, a journey that would eventually lead to trials, and for most, the gallows, the ranch settled into an uneasy peace. The physical danger had passed, but the emotional aftermath remained unsettled. Owen found Abigail on the porch the evening after the marshal's departure, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered hills in shades of rose and gold. She turned at his approach, her expression unreadable. "The roads to Virginia City will be passable within the week," he said without preamble. Marshal Thornton confirmed it. Abigail nodded slowly. "Yes, I heard. Your aunt will be relieved to know you're alive," Owen continued, struggling to keep his tone neutral, "and the reward money will help you start over." "Yes," she agreed softly. "It would." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words between them. Finally, Owen could bear it no longer. "I meant what I said before the attack," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "about you staying, but not just as a bookkeeper." He took a deep breath. "I'm in love with you, Abigail. I think I have been since I found you in that storm. I know it's sudden and you have other plans, other obligations, Owen," she interrupted gently, stepping closer to him. "Do you remember what you told Blackwell, that I was your wife?" He nodded, confused by the change in direction. "It was a tactical decision. I thought it felt right," she said simply. "When you said it, it felt like the truth, even though it wasn't. Yet." Owen's heart seemed to stop. "Yet," he repeated carefully. Abigail smiled, the expression transforming her face. "I've written to my aunt explaining everything. I've told her I won't be coming to Virginia City after all. If the offer still stands, I'd like to stay here." She reached for his hand. "With you." Owen pulled her into his arms, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Are you certain? Ranch life is hard, especially for a woman accustomed to the city." "I'm certain that I love you," she replied steadily. "Everything else we can figure out together." She looked up at him, her amber eyes clear and resolute. "I came west looking for a new beginning. I think I've found it, just not where I expected." The kiss they shared then was a promise of love, of partnership, of a future built together on this wild Montana land that had brought them to each other. Spring came early to the Montana Territory that year, melting the snows and bringing new life to the Taylor Ranch. By the time the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, Abigail Jensen had become Abigail Taylor in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit judge during his delayed winter rounds. The reward money from Blackwell's capture went partly toward expanding the ranch house, adding proper rooms, a larger kitchen, and even glass windows imported from Denver. The rest was invested in breeding stock that would, in time, make the Taylor Ranch one of the most successful in the territory. On a warm evening in late May, Owen found his wife standing in the same spot where he'd first promised she'd be warm before the hour was through. She was watching a new foal frisk around its mother in the paddock, her expression peaceful. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Abigail leaned back against him, covering his hands with her own. "None," she replied without hesitation, "though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if that stagecoach had never been attacked." "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway," Owen mused. "Some things are meant to be." She turned in his embrace to face him, her eyes bright with happiness. "Like a cowboy finding a woman shaking in the wind, exactly like that," he agreed, kissing her softly. "Best thing I ever found." And as the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues above them, Owen Taylor knew with absolute certainty that no gold claim, no cattle fortune could ever compare to the treasure he'd discovered that snowy November day, a love that had weathered storms both literal and figurative, emerging stronger for the trials they'd faced together. Years passed, and the Taylor Ranch prospered beyond Owen's wildest dreams. What had begun as a modest operation with 80 head of cattle grew into one of the territory's premier breeding programs, with Taylor bloodlines sought after throughout the West. The small cabin expanded into a proper ranch house, and the land holdings doubled, then tripled as adjacent properties became available. But the true measure of their success, as Owen often remarked to Abigail, was not in acres or cattle but in the life they'd built together. Their first child, a daughter they named Eleanor after Abigail's mother, arrived in the spring of 1887, followed 2 years later by a son, James, named for Owen's father. By 1895, when Montana had been a state for 6 years, the Taylor household included a third child, another boy named Thomas, and had become a center of the growing community. Abigail's natural leadership and education had led her to help establish the area's first proper school, where she taught 3 days a week while managing the ranch's increasingly complex finances. Owen, approaching his mid-40s but still strong and vigorous, had become a respected voice in territorial politics, advocating for the rights of small ranchers against the encroaching corporate interests that threatened to dominate the cattle industry. Life wasn't without its challenges: harsh winters, cattle disease, the economic panic of '93 that nearly ruined many of their neighbors, but the foundation they had built proved resilient. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Owen surprised Abigail with a journey back to the exact spot where he had found her during that fateful blizzard. It was summer now, the landscape transformed rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers instead of the snow-covered desolation of that November day. It looked so different, Abigail marveled as they spread a blanket for a picnic lunch. Hard to believe this is where my life changed forever. You were half frozen, terrified, Owen recalled, pouring her a cup of coffee from a thermos. And still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, she laughed, the sound carrying across the open prairie. I doubt that very much. I distinctly remember looking like a drowned rat. A very enchanting drowned rat, he insisted with a grin, the lines around his eyes crinkling with humor and affection. Their 3 children ran nearby, chasing butterflies and collecting rocks, their voices bright against the vast sky. Eleanor, at 8, was already showing Abigail's quick intelligence and Owen's determination. James had inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's thoughtful nature. Little Thomas, not quite 4, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. Did you ever imagine this? Abigail asked softly, watching their children play. That day when you found me, Owen considered the question seriously. Not specifically, no, I'd given up on having a family after Marie left. He seldom mentioned his first wife anymore, but the old wound had long since healed into something he could acknowledge without pain. But from that first night, when you started asking about the ranch, showing interest instead of just enduring until you could leave. He smiled at the memory. I started to hope. Abigail reached across the blanket to take his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I fell in love with this place almost as quickly as I fell in love with you, she confessed. It felt like coming home, even though I'd never been west of the Mississippi before. The land does that, Owen nodded. Calls to some people. They sat in companionable silence, watching clouds drift across the enormous Montana sky until Eleanor came running up, breathless with excitement. Papa, Mama, James found a cave. Can we explore it, please? Owen chuckled, rising to his feet. Let's have a look, but no exploring without proper equipment. That's the rule. As he went to investigate with the children, Abigail remained on the blanket, watching her family with a heart so full it nearly overwhelmed her. From desperate survival to abundant joy, it was a journey she could scarcely have imagined that terrible day when outlaws attacked her stagecoach. The map that had inadvertently brought them together had led to a different kind of treasure than the one Blackwell had sought. The Richardson mine had produced gold for 3 years before playing out, while the life she and Owen had built continued to yield riches of a more enduring kind. When Owen returned with the children, reporting that the cave was merely a shallow depression in a hillside, Abigail was ready with sandwiches and lemonade. As they ate, she told the children once again the story of how their parents met, edited appropriately for young ears, emphasizing the rescue rather than the danger. And Papa said, "You'll be warm before the hour's through," she finished, smiling at Owen across their children's rapt faces. "Did you get warm, Mama?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide. "I did," she assured him. "Your father keeps his promises." Later, as they packed up their picnic and prepared to return to the ranch, Owen pulled Abigail aside for a moment of privacy while the children clambered onto their ponies. "Happy anniversary," he said softly, pressing something into her palm. Abigail opened her hand to find a delicate gold locket, clearly custom-made. When she opened it, she found a tiny painting of their 3 children on one side and a miniature map on the other, not of a gold mine, but of the spot where they had first met, marked with a heart instead of an X. "Owen," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "It's perfect." "Like you," he replied simply, helping her fasten it around her neck. "The best treasure Montana ever gave me." As they rode home together, the Taylor family silhouetted against the setting sun, Abigail touched the locket at her throat and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had led her astray, the outlaws who had driven her into the wilderness, and most of all, for the cowboy who had found her shaking in the wind and promised her warmth. It was a promise he had kept, not just for an hour but for a lifetime,